Hello everybody, welcome to Cap at Home. I'm Miss Rachel and today we're going to have a little bit of a sewing project today. So we're making worry pets. And don't worry if you've never sewn anything today or if you've never sewn anything before, today you can get your first practice in. It's a really simple project. I'll show you what you need and I'll even include some insider tips just in case the sewing gets a little sticky. So let's hop on over to the table and I can show you what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and what you need. Okay, so I have a couple of my pets here already. Let's get this light on there. So this is what we're going to make, and it's really just a simple little bean bag, and it's meant to kind of just be sort of like a fidgety toy that you can just kind of play with when you might be a little nervous or just to have fun with. So these are my examples, and we have a ton of different supplies that you can use. In the comments or caption area, I said you need Cuddle Fabric, and I have this fleece fabric. If you are able to go to Joann's or something like that, they have a lot of Cuddle Fabric on sale now, and that is the fake fur. So you can get some of that, but if you don't have that, then you do not need to go out and buy anything. You can use like an old t-shirt or some old clothes that don't fit anymore or that are a little worn. This is a sleeve from a t-shirt. That's also something good to use. You will need pins and needles. So my pins are these here. They have a little ball on the end, and what they're going to do is hold our fabric in place while we're sewing. But if you don't have straight pins like this because you're not a seamstress, you may be able to use something like paper clips to keep your fabric in place, or safety pins or something kind of like that you have around the house. And for the eyes, you can use buttons, and I have some that are off from shirts and things. Like when you buy a new shirt, sometimes you get extra buttons. So, and then I have some mismatched buttons from around the house. Also, if you have some googly eyes, then you can hot glue them on. So you will need hot glue if you take this approach. But I got these for my class last year, and these are safety eyes, and they're for stuffed animals. So you do not need to go out and buy these, but if you're interested in doing this project a bazillion times and you want to purchase these, I got these from Amazon, and this is called Best Toy Home, and they're black plastic safety eyes, colorful plastic safety craft eyes, and safety noses. So that's what this is. So I said you'll need some pins, but you'll also need sewing needles. And I'm not sure if you can see that. This has a little hole at the top, and that's what makes it a needle, because you'll be able to put your thread in there and stitch your project closed. For my example, I'm going to use this thread, which is a really thick embroidery thread, but most likely you'll be able to get your hands on something like this, which is regular sewing thread, and it's pretty thin. But I'm going to use the thicker stuff so that you can see what I'm doing on camera. But if you have any sewing thread like this, it doesn't need to match your fabric at all, because most likely you will not see your stitches because they'll be inside. And you'll also need something circular to trace. So I have these soup cans that I kept because they have Andy Warhol on them. And you'll need something to trace with. I have a Sharpie marker so that you can see it on the screen, but if you have a Crayola marker that washes out, that will work just fine. I'm pretty sure that's what this is, and it shows up on the fabric really well. And I think that's about it. One thing that also may help, but you probably will not need, is a seam ripper, and this is kind of your undo button for sewing. So if you mess something up, this is a way to pick out your thread and start over. But I doubt you'll need that because This is an easy project. Oh, and to stuff our project, we're using beans. So these are just dried up pinto, or not dried up, but dry pinto beans. You can use any kind of beans that you can get your hands on or that your parents will allow you to use. And if you don't have beans or something like that, you can use cotton balls to stuff in there so that it's a squishy stuffed animal instead of using food that you could probably eat. So I'm going to move this stuff out the way and go on to our first step. The first thing you'll need to do is grab your fabric. I have this left over from my classes last year. And you will want to use just a small piece of it. And when you're cutting out a fabric, please make sure that you're cutting out of the end of the fabric, close to the edges, and not cutting out of the middle. Because when you cut out of the middle, you've created two big scraps, and it might be harder for the next person to come along and use that. But if you cut off of the end, then somebody can use this one big piece that you have left. So when you're cutting out of fabric, paper, anything, make sure you're using a corner and an edge so that you can conserve your material. So I am going to kind of eyeball how big this is, and I'm using my stencil, which is just a can, to make note of that. And I need 2 circles. So instead of tracing this 2 times, I'm going to fold my fabric over where my finger is, and then trace this 1 time and cut both layers of fabric at the same time. That's one thing I didn't tell you you need. You need scissors because you're doing some cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and trace this and then grab my scissors to cut. And as you can see, I am using the edge of the fabric. Let me swing this around so it's a little more in the light. And I'm using my marker to trace the circle. And you will be able to do this more easily because you're not worried about knocking your camera down. Voila. And then you will simply take your scissors, like these here, and cut both pieces of fabric out at the same time. So if cutting through 2 pieces of fabric is a little difficult for you, then go ahead and do this flat and just trace your circle 2 times and cut it 2 times. But if you can kind of handle cutting through 2 pieces of thick fabric, then I would suggest going ahead and cutting once through both pieces. And take your time because you want nice circles. Okay. And once you have these cut out, we are going to put our eyes on. So there we go. We have 2 cut out. I'm going to fold my fabric and put it away where it belongs. If you have a special area for your craft supplies, go ahead and put it away because you're done with that. So now I'm going to make sure that the side that I drew on is face down because I'm attaching my eyes right now. And I don't want the edge that I have drawn on to be on the outside. I want that to be on the inside. So this is now the outside of my fabric that will show up on the outside of my pet. And this is going to be the inside. So I know it may be difficult to tell the outside and inside. If you want, you can just make a little mark to help remind you that this is the inside, and everything that you want to see on the outside of your pet should go on this side of the fabric. So if you are not going to sew on eyes, or if you don't have these safety eyes here like this, then you will grab your hot glue and use your Google eyes And you just want to put a dot of glue right in the middle of the eye and then put that in place. And you want to make sure that it's not close to the edge, because since we need to sew around the edge, we need that space to be clear for us to push our needle through. So I'll do the same thing with the other eye. And since this is your very own design, you can put more than 2 eyes. You can put only 1 eye. It is completely up to you. So there. Now I have 2 Google eyes that I hot glued on. But if you are going to sew on a button like that, then you will need your needle and thread. So for this, I will use this smaller thread because it will go through the button easier. And when you are threading your needle, you'll take your thread before you cut it. You want to have the string pulled out, and you'll come all the way to the end and push the end of the thread through the hole or the eye of the needle. And then you'll pull it through. And now I have a doubled string attached to my needle, which is what you want. And I'm going to find the end of the string and then cut the other piece right there to match that end. Here we go. And to tie my knot, I'm going to wrap the ends around 2 fingers like that. Then spread my fingers out and push the tail through the loop. And I'll push that tail through the loop about 3 times. And then pull it toward the end so that my circle gets smaller and it creates a knot. There you go. And now, when I start sewing, I'm going to start sewing from the back of my fabric so that my knot is on the inside and I don't see it on the outside of my pet. So I'm going to kind of feel around, and this, you'll really just have to feel it and feel where your needle can come up through your button. So my button has 4 holes. So I will need to go through each of those holes to make sure that it is secure to my fabric. And however you decide to go through the holes is up to you. You can make an X shape if you want, or you can make 2 parallel lines. It's completely up to you. So I'm coming up through the back of the fabric with the X on it, pulling that toward me, and then I'm going down through the top, and my needle comes out of the back. So I'm going to do that a couple more times in the other 2 holes. And then I will repeat this same process for the other eye with my other button. And once you have this stitched on there, you'll need to make a knot so that it doesn't come off. And we're going to make the knot on the back of the fabric. So I'm going to flip it over. And I'm going to make a stitch, come through this fabric like this, and make a big loop out of my string. And I'm going to pull my needle through that big loop. And I know it looks funny, but it will make sense as you're doing it. And I want that loop to come around my thread here. So hopefully you can see that. Like that. And so in this loop, I'm going to bring my needle through here a couple more times, kind of like I did at the beginning when I made a knot. But this time, let's pull that out. I'm using my needle instead of the tail ends of the thread. And now I'm going to put my finger on top of this knot and pull it, because that will make sure that my knot is really close to my fabric. So put your finger on top and then just pull it. And now you have a knot. So it looks a little messy, but it is done. Now I'm going to snip my thread and move on to the next steps. So this last way to put an eye in is if you have the safety eyes. So I'm going to grab one out of here, and it has 2 pieces, and those pieces include the back here, which kind of twists out and twist on. Nope, I think this one is messed up. But your safety eye has the actual eye piece and then the backing piece, kind of like an earring. And when you put the eye in, you'll need to make a little hole, and you can do that very, very carefully with your scissors or with your little seam ripper. So I would definitely suggest being very careful with this step because you can poke your finger. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I have the backs right here. I need to grab one. I think I have one here. Cool. So I'm going to decide where I want my eye. Make a little mark on the front of the fabric very lightly so that I know where it's going to be. So I made a little dot with my marker. And I'm going to stab this seam ripper through. And if I was going to do it with my scissors, I would need to open them up and kind of punch through. But you really, really need to be careful. You can also, if you have some straight pins with the little bead on the top, you can also stick those through and kind of just swirl it around to make a circle. And that will start a hole so that you can put your safety eye through. And if it's not working, like mine isn't working, then you can carefully snip a hole with your scissors. So I'm going to use this point to fold this down to have that little mark on the crease and just make a very small hole by cutting very, very carefully. You don't want to make it too big or else your eye will fall out. So now I'm going to use the eye part, stick it through the hole I just made, and then push this backing piece on the back of the screw here, and it's going to click. And you want to push it till you can't get it to click anymore. There you go. So now you have an eye. Alrighty. So now we've attached our eyes. And now it's time to get sewing. So I have these other circles that I need to trim down. That will be the other side. But the 2 that you cut out will be the front and the back. You wouldn't attach so many eyes, so you would just sandwich those together so that the eyes are on the inside. And then we're going to stitch around this edge. So let me trim this down so we can do that. Got it. So now you will need to thread another needle and thread if you don't have any left over from sewing your eye on. And I have mine. I'm going to sit down while I do this. And you'll need to make your knot in your thread. So loop it around your fingers. And then with that loop, you'll want to push the tail through the loop. 1, 2, 3 times. You can do it however many times you want. The more times you do it, the bigger the knot will be. So that's just a note to make there. Okay. And now I'm going to use my needle and hold this in my fabric in place. But if you need help holding it in place, you can use your paper clips to kind of clip the edges together so that they stay in place as you are sewing. And if you have straight pins, then that's what you'll use the straight pins for. So I have the straight pins with the little balls on the end, and I'll stick it through one side so that it comes up back on the back, and then stick it back through so that it comes up in the front. So you don't really need that many. You'll need 4 of whatever you're using, paper clips or straight pins or safety pins, depending on how big your circle is. And you will want to, if this is your first time, you'll probably want to make a mark about where you want to start, which can be anywhere on the circle. I'm going to make a mark here because I'm going to start sewing there, but I need to leave an opening so I can stuff my beans in there. So I'm going to stop sewing here so that this will be my opening, and I can turn my stitched worry pet right side out so that I can see the face and stuff it with beans. So let's get started. So I'm just going to go in, and I'm not going to be too close to the edge. I want to be a little inward from the edge and kind of maintain that same spacing from the edge of the fabric, because if I'm right at the edge, then the thread can rip out and all your beans will spill out. There. So I've pulled it through and I came through the back. Now I'm going to go over just a little bit and push my needle through and pull it up through the top. So that's about the length of my stitch, which is what you want to keep going all the way around. You want to maintain kind of a small stitch. You don't want it to be too big, because if it's too big, then you will have space for your beans to fall out. So sewing this together is all about keeping the beans in. And you will just go up through the fabric and down through the fabric all the way around. Okay. And as you are sewing, you will take out the little pins if they're starting to get in your way, because that means you don't need them anymore. And my stitches are getting a little wide over here, so if you've come kind of far, then I would just go back and make that stitch a little smaller. See, I'm coming up in between one of my stitches here, and that's totally fine. That's just going to make it a little more secure. And I'm going to come up over here. Oops. And make sure you're going through both pieces of fabric and not moving too fast so that you're not. So make sure you're coming up through the back piece of fabric. Okay. And make sure your stitches are staying close together. And you don't want to pull your stitches too tight, because that will kind of wrinkle up this fabric and make it bunch up together. And we want it to lay flat so that we can get our filling in there when it's time to put our filling in there. Okay. So I just have a couple more stitches until I'm over here where I want to stop. And once I get to that place, then I will make a knot so that as I'm flipping this inside out, it doesn't come apart. If you have enough thread, you could actually just leave it. Leave a really long tail. But I'm going to show you the knot again. And if your stitch kind of catches on your safety eye, just use your needle to get it off and make sure you pull it snug. Okay. So you want to make sure your opening is big enough to turn this thing right side out. I have made some and it's been too tight to turn right side out, and that makes this whole process difficult. So make sure you're leaving, I guess that's about an inch or so of an opening. So this is the last stitch I'm going to do before I tie my knot, and I'm not going to pull it all the way through. I want to have my loop here, and then I'm going to come up right in between this thread that's I have here and then the stitch that I just did. I'm going to come up in the middle and I'm going to pull this tight so that I do not have a loop left on the back. And I'm going to go through this loop with my needle one time. I'm going to take this out of the way. Then go through again 2 times. Make sure you have your scraps out of the way. Throw them in the trash so they don't get caught up. And then a 3rd time. And then I'm going to pull it tight because that's going to be my knot. And I'm going to put my finger on it again because I want my knot to be directly on the fabric, and that's going to push it toward the fabric. Push my knot toward the fabric. I have a big knot because I'm using really thick thread. You might not be able to see your knot so well, but there we go. And we're going to use our scissors to cut our thread. And we're done sewing the inside. Now we need to turn this right side out. So we'll come to this opening over here and just push this part through. There we go. And so now I have a teeny tiny little worry pet with the opening on the side. And that is a perfect size opening for my beans. So I'm going to use my little cup here and pour these beans in there. And I probably won't get that many beans. So I would suggest in the very beginning using something a little bigger than the can, because this made a really tiny worry pet. But you live and you learn. And you want to fill this up almost to the top. But you still want to have some space to fold your worry pet's face down in there on itself, because we have to close that up. So I filled mine up, but I still have fabric right here around the edges, and that's what you want. Oop. Some of his insides, his brains are coming out. All right, so we're going to tie our knot in the thread again and start to stitch him closed. We're also going to need our pins to hold the fabric in place. So I'm going to use my straight pin. I want to fold my fabric down in there just a little bit. And for this, you will really need to have the pins. And if you have paper clips, maybe you can kind of take them apart, unfold them a little bit, because it's going to be kind of thick. I don't think that will hold. So it will be helpful to have a pin with a point. So that would be a safety pin or one of the straight pins. Alrighty. Put another one in there. And I'm making sure to push this through the front fabric, my pink fabric, and my yellow fabric in the back. So like I said, you probably want to make a bigger circle than I started out with. So if you get something like a nice size cup instead of a soup can, that ended up being a little too small. So my pins are in there. They look a little crazy, but they are holding my fabric in place, which is all I need. I'm going to move these out of the way so I don't knock them down. Get my other stuff out of the way. And I have my thread with my knot. And since I have this opening here, I'm going to try to go inside just a little bit. And it's really hard to see. And that's the point. You're kind of hiding your stitches this time. So I'm going to push this out through the back. And this needle is too big for this fabric. So if you're having trouble with your needle, just kind of work it. And I'm going to use my needle to push the tail of my knot on the inside of my pet. Cool. So now I'm going to stitch really, really close to where I came out. And you will see my stitches because my thread is so big, but if you do this the right way, you probably won't see your own stitches because you'll be using the regular thread that's really thin. So I'm going to come back and come up through my opening here, pull this, and now I'm going to go through the other side of the fabric, the front fabric, the pink fabric. So I know it's really, really hard to see, but if you need some help with doing this stitch, which is called a ladder stitch, let me know in the comments, because I can do a separate video where I can do it on something where it's bigger and it's more clear what I'm doing. So I'm coming through my pink fabric, and I'm going to go through the yellow also, pull it all the way through. And because we're going through so many layers at this point, it might be a little difficult to pull your needle through, so take your time and make sure you're working somewhere that if your beans fall out, they're not all over the floor and you can kind of get them back in there. So I'm pulling that through and I'm pulling it tight. And now I'm going to come over just a little bit, come through my yellow fabric and also through my pink fabric. And I'm going to pull my pin out because I think I've got it. And once you finish stitching this up, you'll tie one more knot and you'll be done. So I'm going to do this. Now we're going a little long, so wrap it up. But hopefully you've got what you needed out of this video so that you can make an adorable little worry pet like my crazy monster here. And if you do, please make sure you leave us a picture in the comments, or if you need some help or some more clarification on exactly what to do or how to do it, let me know in the comments because I am here to help. And make sure you tune in tomorrow for another Cap at Home video. What else can you do? You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, to find our entire library of videos and do a whole bunch of projects over the next couple days if you want. There we go. We're wrapping it up. Now we have a worry pet. We're going to trim that. And once you get done, you might want to trim this. Make sure your knot is really secure before you trim your thread. And then trim it really close so that you don't see it too much. So there you go. A little worry pet. There we go. So I'm going to add him to my family of worry pets. And like I said, if there's something you need me to explain a little better, I can definitely do that. Leave me some notes in the comments and I will help you out. Make sure you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to view our library of videos because we have a lot of tutorials where we show you a lot of different things. And if there's something that you're interested in, let us know in the comments of any of the videos. We love to hear back from you guys. So thank you so much for joining me, Miss Rachel, and making a worry pet. Hopefully you join us again tomorrow for another live art tutorial at 4 p.m. and we'll see you then.